great news today for anybody who's looking for some really cheap clothing options. 50% off all Elbows Up merchandise, stickers, hats, clothing, etc. Everything must go. Show the world what a gullible jackass you are, and show your support for Mark Carney and the Liberal Party. I hear it goes really well with a Canadian flag with the crease still on it. But hurry, guys. This deal is sure to last a really long time, because as it turns out, nobody wants to wear this garbage. Even the legacy media is starting to figure out what a lie Elbows Up really was. Let's get into it. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Johnny Says So. Make sure you smash the like button and subscribe to the channel on your way in. So, Donald Trump has announced that Canada will be paying a 35% blanket tariff on most of its exports to the United States. This despite the fact that Donald Trump and Mark Carney have allegedly been working on a deal for the last few months to hopefully secure a better outcome for both countries. But recently, Trump has announced that this 35% tariff is the quote-unquote deal. Now, I'm referring, of course, to the letter that Donald Trump has sent not just Canada, but countries all across the world announcing blanket tariffs. Now, the gist of the letter is this. Canada will pay a 35% tariff on most products sent into the United States. And it also goes on to say that there will be no tariff if Canada decides to manufacture products within the United States. Kind of a Fantasyland statement, but I do digress. That's just my opinion. And it also goes on to say, also, I must mention that the flow of fentanyl is hardly the only challenge we have with Canada, which has many tariff and non-tariff policies and trade barriers, which cause unsustainable trade deficits against the United States. And he goes on to bring up the dairy issue again. That, of course, is our supply management. So it's kind of funny because Donald Trump is saying that this is the deal. You're going to pay a 35% tariff and that's it. But again, he goes on to make some demands, suggesting that we will be at the bargaining table down the line. But regardless, Mark Carney is definitely going through the 5 stages of grief. We've seen the denial, we've seen the anger that was most present during the election campaign, we've seen the lame attempt at bargaining, we've seen the depression, and now Mark Carney has moved on to acceptance. Check this out, guys. This was his first moment in front of the media after his return from vacation. Let's watch.
Well, we want to take you live right now to Ottawa, where Prime Minister Mark Carney is speaking to reporters just ahead of his cabinet meeting. You can see the camera just getting into position here. We want to give you a chance to listen in to what the Prime Minister is saying about his meeting and the potential for negotiations with the U.S. over new tariffs.
There's not a lot of evidence right now. And with regards to negotiations for any country or any jurisdiction to have a tariff-free agreement, Canada finds itself in a situation at the moment with a way of having close to free trade continuing. But there are issues, obviously, in the steel, automobile, pharmaceutical and aluminum sector, as well as softwood lumber. So we need to stabilize the situation for Canada. But the tariff for Canada is almost the lowest in the world imposed by Americans.
Tariff, what's your response to that?
He's got nothing to say there, guys.
That is Prime Minister Mark Carney heading into his cabinet meeting. He spoke.
So he's basically at the point where he's just telling the country that we may have to accept some level of tariffs. This is completely counter to what he ran on. Now, this isn't news to me, and I'm sure it's not news to a lot of you guys as well. I think we've all known for months now that Mark Carney was never the person that Canada needed to negotiate with Donald Trump. Far from it. But this is the position that we are in now, unfortunately. But hey, at least the legacy media is starting to catch up and sound a lot like the independent media has been saying for months now, that Elbows Up is all a lie. Listen to this great question from this reporter.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Mark Media, Canadian Press. You told Canadians that you would be elbows up, and they appear to have largely given you a mandate to get a good deal from the president. But thus far, we have not seen that Canada has gotten basically nothing. And Canada also had to give one of its bargaining chips when it comes to the digital services tax, something other countries like the UK did not give up in their deal with the US. How do you still convince Canadians that you are really elbows up?
Well, look, we are in the midst of long now and tough negotiations with the United States. And we're working for the best deal for Canada. We have put in place a series of retaliatory measures, including in the steel sector.
And that's not great news, guys, because as the letter already said, if for any reason you decide to raise your tariffs, then whatever the number you choose to raise them by will be added onto that 35% that we charge. Not smart, guys. Not smart at all.
We have secured tariff-free access for a number of Canadian goods. In fact, the percentages are very high in terms of outside of the most affected sectors, steel being one of them, autos, aluminum, forest products. The vast majority of Canadian goods and services are tariff-free. That is not the case for most other countries.
So that's the best he has. This is the great news that he has to report to the Canadian people, is that he's bragging that we don't pay as high tariffs as other countries. That's it, Mark? That's all you got? Of course we're not paying the same amount of tariffs as other countries, because at the end of the day, the United States does rely on Canada for a lot, despite what Donald Trump says. Over on CBC, this has gotten so obvious that even Power and Politics is starting to report on this now. Check it out.
I want to start with you. It is a fact that other countries are not getting deals that don't include tariffs at this point. Was this the inevitable conclusion of where things were going to land for Canada?
I'm getting very confused, Catherine, about where to put my elbows. They're up and they're down, and if they keep moving that way, we're going to look like a bunch of chickens.
We did look like a bunch of chickens, guys, figuratively and literally. Never forget, this was the scene. This was actually the scene in some lineups to go vote in this past election.
Elbows up! Elbows up! Elbows up! Elbows up! Elbows up!
Yeah, so a lot of these people have been very quiet lately, haven't they?
The Prime Minister has an expectation management problem. You referenced it off the top. He billed himself during the election as the guy that would get a good deal for Canada, and the reality is that our tariffs are higher today than they were on election day. We had the doubling of the steel and aluminum tariff. We now have this August 1st threat. So we don't appear to be closer to a deal than we were on election day, and that is a problem for the Prime Minister because he billed himself as the guy to get it done. So what can Canada be doing? If tariffs are the reality and other countries have them as their reality, what are we doing to systemically make investment in Canada better?
Now, before I keep playing this clip, guys, I would like to point out that while she is correct about Mark Carney misrepresenting his ability to deal with Donald Trump, that's a very important point, and it's valid. We also can't forget, guys, the legacy media was very complicit in pumping all of this up. Never forget, guys, look at all this stuff. Look at these countless articles pumping up Mark Carney. Mark Carney has what it takes to deal with Trump. Carney is Quebec's choice to deal with Trump. Who is Mark Carney? Maybe just who Canada wants to face off against Trump. Majority of Canadians tap Carney as best to negotiate with Trump, according to a poll. Anyway, let's get back into it.
So far, the proposal has been to expedite energy projects to, oh my goodness, 2 years, while other jurisdictions are moving faster than that. The U.S. is changing things like their corporate tax rate, or they're at least looking at systems to attract more business investment, and that's totally absent the tariff conversation. So we seem to be very focused on, how we might tax bourbon and ketchup a little bit more to hit back against the Americans, and not addressing some of the big challenges that exist for Canada's economy to thrive.
Now, that's absolutely correct, guys. So a broken clock can be right twice a day. That is a very good point. 2 years to get energy projects off of the ground? Absolutely unacceptable. We should have done this stuff 10 years ago. And this whole thing about bourbon and ketchup truly is laughable. Yeah, elbows up. I can't buy a bottle of Jack Daniels. Great. And finally, we have Mark Carney subsidizing the Canadian steel industry in an attempt to mitigate some of the damage from his absolute failure to strike a deal with the United States. This from Dassey Media. Carney announces new Trump-style tariffs on all countries using Chinese steel. USA exempt. Elbows down. Of course, guys, because at the end of the day, I don't agree with protectionism, and I don't agree with the strategy of tariffs. But Mark Carney is just doing what Donald Trump is doing, trying to protect the local domestic steel industry from cheap imported steel.
And we will also implement additional tariffs on steel imports from all non-U.S. countries containing steel melted and poured in China. Our existing arrangements with our CUSMA partners will remain the same, including no changes to our current trade measures with the United States.
Now, I wish I could believe him, but it's honestly hard to believe it after the federal government just bought ferries manufactured in China for British Columbia. Another reason to be skeptical of this, guys, is Mark Carney's industrial carbon tax that he ran on. Pierre Poilievre putting this one out there. If Prime Minister Carney wants to stop the damage to our steel and aluminum workers, he should axe the Liberal industrial carbon tax. President Trump and PM Carney both want to tax our steel and aluminum workers. One with tariffs, the other with carbon taxes. And don't forget, guys, Mark Carney literally ran on this. He promised that Canadian companies would pay more for their quote-unquote pollution.
But the large polluters pay. And so what happens...
But does that not ultimately trickle down?
No, because what the big companies are producing, by and large, are not products that we are consuming. A steel company, how much steel are you using these days, Todd?
How much steel are you using these days? Unbelievable, guys. So this was just in January of this past year. I don't know about you, but I'm very skeptical that Mark Carney gives two shits about the steel industry or the workers or their families. Well, I think it's pretty safe to say at this point that Elbows Up was a massive lie, to the point that the legacy media can't even ignore it anymore, and they're starting to put their own spin on it. So if there's a silver lining here, it's that 50% discount Elbows Up merchandise. Nobody's buying this stuff anymore, guys. And I hate to say I told you so, but I think the silence of Mark Carney supporters these days says it all. I think eventually we're going to get to the point where people start to wake up, and I certainly hope that it's not too late for the country by the time that happens. But let me know what you think down in the comments, because that's going to be my show for tonight, guys. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Johnny from Nova Scotia says thank you. Hey, Johnny from Nouvelle-Écosse, il dit merci, thank you.
Thanks to you.
Thank you so much. Perfect. Yeah, Quebec.